the phone in your hand, the car on your street, the coffee you drank this morning. A piece of each one belongs to a single country of 5.5 million people, fewer than live in many cities. There is almost no company on earth it doesn't quietly own a share of. And the strangest part is that they will never touch a cent of it. It started one night, far out in the North Sea. Beneath a platform miles from the nearest coast, a drilling crew hit something they had long stopped believing was there. So much oil, they didn't trust their own instruments. More than half a century ago. For almost every country in history, a night like that has been a curse. Because you have to remember where this country came from. Before the oil, Norway was one of the poorest corners of Western Europe. Fishermen, woodcutters, fjords, and so little to eat that whole valleys emptied out. Generations who left to try their luck on the far side of the Atlantic. Even today, more people of Norwegian descent live in a single American state, Minnesota, than in the city of Oslo itself. Half a century later, that same country is the richest on earth. And almost nothing about it looks the way you'd expect. A nation that sells its oil to the world, but refuses to burn it at home. A people sitting on the largest fortune ever set aside, who live as though it weren't there, while their own children can no longer afford an apartment. From the outside, none of it adds up. From the inside, it adds up completely. And it all comes back to a single decision, made the night that oil first came out of the dark. To have the money and refuse to spend it. But to understand a choice like that, you have to go back. Long before the money, before the oil. To the ice. Norway is a country the ice built. In the last age of glaciers, sheets of ice a mile thick sat on this land and over thousands of years ground their way to the sea. They carved the valleys deeper than the ocean floor. When the ice finally let go, the water rushed in and left the fjords behind. Look at the greatest of them, the Sognefjord. It runs more than 100 miles inland and drops almost a mile straight down. The longest and deepest fjord in Norway and the second longest on the planet. On either side, walls of rock climb thousands of feet, waterfalls falling the whole way. Villages cling to the few flat ledges. There is no room for anything else. Do that 1,000 times over, and you get the Norwegian coast. Folded and split and folded again until it becomes one of the longest coastlines in the world, long enough to wrap more than twice around the earth. A country you almost cannot draw. And a country almost impossible to hold together. For most of its history, the mountains and the water cut every valley off from the next. Power struggled to travel. A farm 2 fjords away might as well have been in another country. People leaned on themselves and their neighbors because the land gave them little other choice. Here, independence was never really an idea. it was a fact of the ground. So long before there was a fund, there was already a habit here. No one owns the whole thing. The land was too vast, too broken, too wild to belong to any single hand. What it would not give them, they took instead from the sea. Everything they had came out of cold water. Every winter, out of the darkness of the Barents Sea, a river of fish turns and swims south. Millions of Arctic cod, coming to the Lofoten Islands to spawn. They have done it for as long as anyone can remember. And for 1,000 years, the people of the North rode out into the winter storms to meet them. What they couldn't eat, they hung. On that coast, the winter air does something strange. Cold enough to keep the fish from rotting, dry enough to cure it hard as wood. Cod hung on wooden racks become stockfish. Light, unspoiling, and so concentrated that a single pound holds the nourishment of 5. It keeps for years. That dried fish became Norway's first fortune. It is the oldest thing the country ever sold to the world. Carried by Vikings, traded through the wharves of Bergen, shipped as far as Italy, where to this day a cod pulled from the Arctic dark can end up on a plate in Rome. The old parliament called the fisheries the nation's true gold mine, and they meant it. The cod built the towns, the churches, the country itself. For centuries, that trade had a capital, Bergen on the western coast. Foreign merchants built a row of narrow wooden houses along its harbour and grew rich on dried fish. So rich that for a time, Bergen was one of the largest towns in all of Scandinavia, a city built almost entirely on cod. Those crooked wooden warehouses still lean over the water today, worn but standing. Long before there was oil money, there was fish money. Pulled from a cold grey sea, a haul at a time, by people who knew that next winter the fish might not come, and who saved as if they wouldn't. And notice what kind of wealth it was. Not a mine you empty, not a well you drain. The cod came and left and came again, and you took only what the season gave you. A fortune you could not spend all at once, even if you tried. For 1,000 years, that was the only wealth Norway had. Something the cold handed them, a little at a time, that they had learned never to waste. And then, one winter night, far out at sea, they found another. At first, no one believed it was there. The major companies had surveyed the North Sea and returned their verdict. Nothing here. One company insisted on drilling a final well, almost for the sake of it. That well was Ekofisk, one of the largest offshore fields ever found. Getting it out was another matter. The North Sea is one of the most brutal places on Earth to work. Freezing water, waves that can rise as tall as a house, storms that howl for days on end. Norway had never drilled for oil in its life. It had no rigs, no engineers, no industry of its own. It had fishermen. And yet, in a single generation, it built one of the most advanced offshore operations on the planet. Platforms taller than skyscrapers, anchored in water deep enough to swallow them, drawing oil from beneath one of the angriest seas in the world. And where any other country would have opened the taps, Norway did something almost unheard of in the history of oil. It slowed down. Before pumping at full tilt, its parliament sat down and wrote a document. 10 rules on a single page to govern a fortune that hadn't even left the ground yet. The first oil nation in history to write its law before touching its money. They were called the 10 Oil Commandments, a kind of petroleum constitution passed unanimously that the parties even promised never to use as an election weapon. And they kept their word. Why so much caution? Because they had seen elsewhere what oil does to poor countries. Economists have a name for it: the resource curse. A country finds a treasure under its feet, and 10 years later, it is more corrupt, more unequal, more unstable than before. The treasure builds nothing. It rots everything. Norway decided in writing that it would not be that country. And it needed somewhere to put the money, somewhere no one ever could take it back out. That somewhere exists. It is run from an office building in Oslo by a handful of people on behalf of an entire country. The rule that governs it is almost absurdly simple, and almost no one has managed to copy it since. The oil money never enters the state's accounts. It goes straight into a fund invested all over the world, never in Norway itself. And the government is allowed to spend only the interest, around 3% a year. Never the capital, not 1 cent more. Which means no politician, no crisis, no campaign promise can drain the reserve. The money is set aside for Norwegians who haven't been born yet. And the reserve has grown beyond anything anyone imagined. Today, the fund is worth more than $2 trillion. It is the largest pool of wealth held by any single country on Earth. It owns a piece of roughly 7,000 companies spread across the globe. Close to 1.5% of every publicly traded share on the planet. It votes in tens of thousands of shareholder meetings. It even keeps a blacklist. The companies it judges too dirty or too violent to own a single share of. In fact, the fund has become something stranger than an investor. Because it owns a piece of nearly everything, it has quietly turned into a kind of conscience for global business. It refuses to hold companies that build nuclear weapons, that wreck the environment, or that abuse their workers. And it publishes their names for the world to see. It walked away from coal. In tens of thousands of boardrooms, it will never set foot in. It votes against reckless pay and reckless risk. It is perhaps the closest thing the global economy has to a quiet superpower. And it answers to a nation of fishermen. So here is what that comes to, right now as you watch this. Norway owns a piece of almost everything you know. Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, among its largest holdings. A country of fishermen has quietly become the biggest shareholder on the planet. Split among its people, that fortune comes to nearly $400,000 each on paper. Except no one can withdraw a dollar of it. They all own it. They will never touch it. So what does a country do with a fortune it has promised never to spend? It doesn't buy palaces. It buys a society. The few percent the fund throws off each year helps pay for something most of the world only talks about. Healthcare and university, effectively free. Nearly a year of paid leave for a new child, split between both parents. A gap between the richest and the poorest that is among the smallest anywhere on Earth. The fortune isn't handed out as cash. It's spent on the floor beneath everyone's feet. And you can see the result in the strangest place of all, in its prisons. Norway's most secure prison sits in a forest near the Swedish border. There are no bars on the windows. The cells look like dorm rooms. Prisoners cook, study, work, and walk grounds that could pass for a college campus. From the outside, it looks absurd, soft even, until you look at the numbers. In much of the world, more than half of the people released from prison are back behind bars within a few years. In Norway, only about 1 in 5 ever returns, one of the lowest rates of reoffending anywhere on Earth. And the logic is exactly the logic of the fund. Don't grab the reward in front of you. The satisfaction of punishment, the money in hand. Build the thing that pays off slowly, for years, for the people who come after. A prisoner who never comes back, a child born into a country that already saved for them. This is what the discipline bought. Not luxury, a place where almost everyone is quietly taken care of. And that same restraint runs through everything here. Even through the way they live under a sky that for months at a time refuses to give them any sun at all. That is not a figure of speech. Go far enough north in Norway, past the Arctic Circle to a city like Tromsø. And for part of every winter, the sun does not rise at all. Not low, not weak. It simply doesn't come. For the better part of 2 months, the world outside is a long blue twilight fading into night. People go to work in the dark and come home in the dark. And then the year turns, and the debt is repaid all at once. Through the summer, the sun never sets. It circles the sky at midnight. Children play outside at 2 in the morning, and the light does not leave for weeks. And on the clearest winter nights, the dark does something no one ever quite gets used to. High overhead, the sky begins to move. Curtains of green and violet light rippling across the black. It's the aurora, thrown out by storms on the sun and caught in the magnetic pull of the far north. To the old Sami of the inland plains, those lights were the spirits of the dead. And you did not wave or whistle at them for fear they might carry you off. To everyone else, they are simply the most beautiful thing the long night has to give. people will drive for hours and stand out in the deep cold just to watch the sky catch fire. A place like this shapes the people in it. You cannot fight a darkness that long, so the Norwegians made peace with it instead. They have a word, koselig, for the warmth you build against the night. Candles, wool, a fire, the people you love in one small bright room, while the cold leans on the glass. And they have another, friluftsliv, open-air living, that sends them out into the worst of the weather anyway. Skiing under the northern lights, walking in the half-dark, because waiting indoors for the sun would mean waiting away half your life. And nowhere is that clearer than in the snow. Here, winter isn't something to be survived. It's the thing this country turned out to be best at in all the world. Start with the word itself. Ski is Norwegian, the old word for a split length of wood, because Norwegians have been doing this longer than almost anyone can trace. On rock faces in the far north, there are carvings of hunters on skis older than the pyramids, cut by people who use them not for sport, but simply to cross a frozen country. For most of history, this wasn't recreation. It was how you hunted, how you reached the next farm, how you made it through the winter at all. That head start never left them. There's a saying that Norwegians are born with skis on their feet, and it's barely an exaggeration. Children here learn to ski at about the age they learn to walk. On a bright winter weekend, half the country seems to be out on the trails. Grandparents, toddlers, whole families gliding through the forest in silence. It isn't a sport you watch, it's just what you do when the snow comes. And when the world lines up to compete on it, this country of barely 5 million wins more than anyone. More medals across the history of the Winter Games than the United States, more than nations many times its size. Handed the longest, hardest winter in Europe, Norway didn't simply endure it. It strapped the snow to its feet and made it the thing it would be remembered for. It is the same instinct again, in another form. You don't get to choose what the land and the sky hand you. The dark comes whether you like it or not. All you get to decide is what you build inside it. Which is why, in a place this cold and this dark, you would expect a country that burns everything it can lay its hands on. Norway is the opposite. On an oil field, anywhere in the world, there's an image you stop noticing. The flare. A giant flame, day and night, burning off gas that no one captured. In Norway, it doesn't exist. It was banned on the very first page of the Ten Commandments. From the beginning, this country decided not to burn what it could sell. You find that same instinct everywhere. Norway sells its oil to the whole world. It is one of Europe's largest energy suppliers, but at home, it barely wants any. Last year, more than 95% of new cars sold in the country were electric. The best-selling car in Norway isn't a gas car. It's a Tesla. Gasoline there has become a rounding error. Just as the rest of Europe was beginning to back away from its own targets. The electricity, meanwhile, comes almost entirely from water falling out of the fjords. And that water does more than move their cars. Nearly all of Norway's electricity, close to 90%, comes from hydropower. Rivers and waterfalls pouring out of the same mountains the ice once carved. The country is stitched with reservoirs that hold between them roughly half of all the stored hydropower in Europe. When the wind drops across the continent, Norway can open its dams and sell the difference. A kind of giant battery for its neighbors. Even its power is only water falling that it learned to catch. And all the while, the national oil company, 2/3 owned by the same state that bans gasoline at home, drills new wells further and further north, all the way into the Arctic. Imagine California banning gasoline on its own soil while selling its oil to the rest of the world. That's roughly Norway. Green at home, fossil for export. It may be the shrewdest strategy in the entire energy transition. It may be the most hypocritical. Norway has simply stopped choosing. It does both at once without blinking. Which leaves one question. What does it feel like to live on top of all that money and never feel it at all? Norway has a law that surprises every visitor. It's called allemannsretten, the everyman's right. It lets anyone walk, camp, and pitch a tent for the night almost anywhere in nature, even on private land. In the richest country on earth, the most beautiful thing you can own, no one really owns. That's the first surprise. The wealth doesn't show. No excess, no display. What organizes life here isn't money. It's the climate and the light. Luxury here isn't a car. It's a small wooden cabin by a lake with no running water where you go to cut yourself off from the world. And yet living in the richest country on earth is not what you'd imagine. A coffee in Oslo costs between $8 and $12. A beer around $15. An apartment in the capital sells for Manhattan prices. Here is the face no brochure shows. You can grow up in a country that owns a slice of the whole world and still not afford your first apartment. Because the fortune is in the vault. It belongs to everyone, and so to no one in particular. The whole country lives exactly what its fund lives, holding an immense fortune and never touching it. For the fund, that's a strength. For a 30-year-old Norwegian, it's a wall. Because this bet has a price, and it isn't always the people who placed it who pay. An honest country eventually turns and looks its costs in the face. Norway's run deeper than the postcards let on. Start with the water that made it beautiful. Norway is the world's largest producer of farmed salmon. Nearly half the farmed Atlantic salmon on the planet comes out of its fjords and ends up most likely on your plate. But the farms saturate that water. Sea lice, pollution, thousands of escaped fish that weaken the wild runs. The the greenest country on Earth, is quietly damaging the very fjords that fill its own postcards. And the green image cracks inland too. Far to the north live the Sami, the first inhabitants of this land, whose reindeer herds have grazed it since time out of mind. To produce the clean energy the country is so proud of, a large wind farm was raised right across their pastures. Not long ago, the highest court in the land ruled that farm illegal. It violated the herders' rights. The turbines are still turning. Even clean energy here has its casualties. And there is a deeper contradiction, one the country rarely says out loud. Every mile of this green paradise, the electric cars, the clean rivers, the fund that lectures the world on ethics, was paid for by oil. Norway is one of the largest exporters of the very fossil fuel it refuses to burn at home. Its entire fortune, the whole 2 trillion, is money the rest of the world spent filling its skies with carbon. The greenest country on Earth is also quietly one of the reasons the air is changing. It has simply arranged things so that the smoke rises somewhere else. But the heaviest cost isn't paid at the country's edges. It's paid in its cities by its own young. In one of the most equal nations on Earth, those under 35 can no longer buy a home in the capital. The fortune is real, and it belongs to all of them. But the apartment in front of them belongs to someone who bought in time. The gap widens between those who already own and those who arrived too late. And some of them leave for a reason that shows up in no budget at all. It was written, long ago, into a novel. A small imaginary town called Jante, whose first rule is that you are not to think you are anyone special. Norway recognized itself in that town so completely that it became an unwritten law, the Janteloven. Here, you don't boast, you don't rise too high, you don't shine too bright. But those who dream bigger than Jante often end up retracing their poor ancestors' journey. They leave for London, for New York. The country that held onto its money so well has never quite learned to hold on to its talent. Go back to the image from the beginning. The platform, alone in the North Sea night. But this time, pull back. Widen the frame. And behind it, on the horizon, other shapes take form in the dark. The first offshore wind turbines, lined up, turning slowly. Norway didn't escape the oil curse by luck. It escaped by a discipline almost no democracy has ever managed. A people who wrote their rules before they touched their money. Who voted, again and again, not to spend what they could have spent. Who set aside a fortune for people not yet born, and refused, to the very end, to touch it. Whether that future looks like untouched fjords or fields of turbines in the dark, that's the bet Norway made. And so far, it's the only one in history that still seems to be paying off. But Norway is a small country, 5.5 million people, holding the world at arm's length. What happens when you go to the opposite extreme? To a place so vast, it isn't really one country at all, but a continent hiding inside a single name, where deserts, tropics, and frozen mountains all answer to the same capital, and more than 1 billion people share almost nothing but the map they were born inside. That country is China. That's where we go next. Subscribe to keep discovering how people live at the edges of the world. We'll see you at the next edge of the map.